Power is never afraid of rebellion. It is afraid of independence. There is a moment, rarely spoken about, when the top dog stops feeling powerful and starts feeling exposed. Not because someone challenged them publicly, not because a rival got louder, but because someone appeared who did not behave correctly in the presence of power. Someone who didn't lean in, didn't flinch, didn't worship, didn't mirror the script. That moment is subtle, almost invisible. Yet, it is the exact moment fear enters the room. History quietly confirms this. Systems collapse far more often from internal non-compliance than from open revolt. Empires didn't fall because people screamed at the throne. They fell because enough individuals stopped emotionally participating in the illusion. No chants, no banners, just withdrawal of belief. Control without belief is just a costume with good lighting. This is where the misunderstanding begins. The top dog doesn't think you're mystical because you're dramatic. They think you're otherworldly because you're operationally unfamiliar. Your psychology doesn't map onto their expectations. You don't respond to incentives the way you should. You don't signal submission or hunger. You don't behave like someone who needs access, approval, or proximity. To a mind trained in dominance, that's not confidence. That's an anomaly. And anomalies are unsettling, especially the kind that don't announce themselves, don't posture, don't evangelize, and don't try to convert the room. You're not anti-power. You're simply not oriented around it. That distinction matters more than people realize. One threatens authority, the other quietly dissolves it. There's also a strange irony here, and this is where it gets mildly funny. The top dog has spent decades mastering leverage, perception, timing, and control, only to encounter someone who accidentally disarms all of it by not caring enough to play. Imagine training your whole life to dominate a chessboard, then realizing the person across from you is playing Go on a different table, in another building, and somehow still winning. This is why fear shows up disguised as curiosity, surveillance, and respect, laced with tension. Because power can fight enemies. It can crush rebellion. What it cannot easily deal with is a presence that operates on a logic it didn't authorize. This is not about superiority. It's about misalignment. And when the top dog senses that you exist outside their psychological jurisdiction, the story in their head shifts fast, not to awe, to concern. Because power understands one thing better than anything else. What it cannot categorize, it cannot control. Number one, you operate outside their incentive system. Most power is built on a simple assumption. People move when you pull the right strings. Offer money, status, access, praise, or fear, and they'll bend. The top dog has spent years mastering this. They know who wants what, how badly they want it, and how long they can delay it before obedience shows up. This is not guesswork for them, it's muscle memory. Then you appear, and something doesn't register. They offer opportunity, and you don't rush. They hint at approval, and you don't glow. They apply pressure, and you don't crack. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because those rewards and threats don't reach the core of how you decide. You're not motivated by the usual currencies, and that breaks the entire control model. When incentives fail, power doesn't feel challenged. It feels confused. What unsettles them most is that your behavior can't be predicted using their existing playbook. You don't escalate when ignored. You don't overperform when praised. You don't self-destruct when excluded. You move according to an internal logic that doesn't need external reinforcement. To someone who governs by leverage, this looks irrational. And irrational things are dangerous because they don't respond to pressure the way they're supposed to. This is where fear creeps in quietly, not panic, not hostility, unease. Because if one person can exist outside the incentive system, it suggests the system itself isn't universal. And if it isn't universal, it isn't law, it's just agreement. Power survives on the belief that its rewards are necessary and its punishments are fatal. You expose the lie without saying a word by continuing to function normally without either. The top dog starts watching you differently, not to admire you and not to crush you, but to study you. They want to know what moves you. They want to find the lever, and when they can't, something clicks in their mind that they don't enjoy admitting. Control only works on those who need something. You don't. And that makes you the one variable they can't neutralize, buy, or scare into place. Number 2, you see hierarchy as a tool, not a truth. Most people treat hierarchy like gravity. They assume it's natural, permanent, and unquestionable. Titles, ranks, seating order, who speaks first, who gets interrupted, all of it feels fixed in their minds. The top dog especially depends on this belief. Their authority isn't just about control, it's about everyone silently agreeing that the ladder is real and that their position on it means something beyond convenience. You don't share that belief. You recognize hierarchy for what it actually is, a temporary structure built to coordinate effort, not a sacred order of worth. You respect it when it works and step around it when it doesn't. That flexibility is deeply unsettling to someone whose identity is welded to rank. Because if hierarchy is just a tool, then their position is not destiny, it's a role, and roles can be reassigned. This shows up in small, quiet ways. You don't overreact to titles. You don't shrink in the presence of status. You don't over-explain yourself to people above you or talk down to people below you. You engage based on competence and clarity, not position. That alone disrupts the social rhythm they expect. Power thrives on predictable deference. You offer none, but also no disrespect. That neutrality is more destabilizing than open defiance. The real discomfort comes from what your behavior implies. If hierarchy is a tool, then stepping outside it isn't rebellion, it's adjustment. You can cooperate without submitting and disengage without betraying. That makes it hard to place you. You're not climbing, not kneeling, not challenging. You're simply operating. For the top dog, this creates a quiet panic. Their authority depends on emotional reinforcement. People must feel the weight of rank for it to work. You don't carry that weight. You treat commands like suggestions that need to make sense first. You follow structure when it's efficient and ignore it when it's performative. That exposes an uncomfortable truth. Hierarchy only holds power over those who believe it defines reality. They start realizing something they'd rather not face. If more people saw hierarchy the way you do, their position wouldn't collapse overnight. It would become optional. And nothing frightens power more than the idea that its dominance isn't natural, eternal, or necessary, but conditional, fragile, and quietly dependent on collective belief. Number 3, you don't compete, you observe outcomes. Most people live in a world of constant competition. They measure themselves by wins and losses, by who dominates, who outshines, who grabs attention first. The top dog is no different. They thrive on this predictable energy because it makes influence measurable. Victory is visible, and control is enforceable. Everyone is either climbing, falling, or scrambling to maintain a position, and the top dog knows exactly how to move within that chaos. You don't play the same game. You don't compete for dominance or attention. You step back and watch results. You study patterns, outcomes, and behaviors without being drawn into the emotional charge of the contest. You notice the ripple effects of decisions, the inconsistencies in others' power, and the points where systems fail. You absorb more from observation than most people could ever glean from engagement. That alone makes you invisible in the wrong way, present but untouchable. This terrifies those who are used to control. They rely on others reacting predictably to their moves. You don't. You don't escalate when provoked. You don't mirror tension. You don't fight for recognition. Your calm detachment exposes the truth they hide from themselves. Influence only exists because people accept it. When someone can operate outside that transactional world, suddenly their leverage feels flimsy. Your approach also makes them restless because it's subtle. You are not an open threat. You are a quiet force. You gather intelligence, learn the rhythms, and make decisions based on logic, not ego. The top dog cannot read you using standard metrics because the usual metrics, fear, flattery, ambition, don't apply. You are governed by insight, timing, and understanding, not the hunger to dominate or impress. They start to realize, often too late, that someone who doesn't compete is harder to manipulate, harder to predict, and far more dangerous than any rival they've faced. You don't need to win in their terms because your definition of success doesn't depend on them at all. And that simple difference, invisible to most, is enough to unbalance even the most seasoned power player. Number 4, you are not impressed by proximity to power. Most people measure themselves by who they can sit next to, shake hands with, or be seen near. The top dog depends on this. Their power isn't just in what they control, it's in how much others reverence them for being close to it. Attention, approval, access, and proximity are the currencies that reinforce their dominance. The higher you climb, the more people around you validate your importance, and the top dog thrives on that ritual. You don't play that game. You treat proximity the same way a scientist treats a lab experiment, with interest, not awe. You observe, evaluate, and interact only when it makes sense, not because the position of the person across from you demands it. Titles, accolades, influence, and fame do not inflate your judgment or your ego. To someone who built authority by commanding respect through proximity, this is jarring. They expect admiration, but you deliver calm, neutral assessment instead. That lack of response quietly unravels their system. If people stopped being impressed by proximity, what would authority even mean? It becomes performative, fragile, dependent on collective belief rather than actual merit. Your indifference doesn't insult, it disarms. You don't compete to be closer, and you don't shrink when someone is nearer. You act as if rank exists only when it matters, and only when it produces results. This makes you unpredictable. The top dog cannot leverage access or position against you. They cannot buy compliance or loyalty, because proximity does not influence your choices. They are left with a disorienting realization. Their presence, their prestige, their influence, they are irrelevant to your internal compass. That is why fear, subtle but unmistakable, creeps in. Not the kind that sparks confrontation, but the kind that makes them double-check their assumptions. You show that true independence is not loud, not performative, and not dependent on social rituals. You prove that power can be observed, understood, and respected without ever needing to be impressed by it. And for someone whose entire strategy relies on the awe of others, that realization is quietly destabilizing and profoundly unnerving. Number 5, you don't need enemies to define yourself. Most people define themselves through opposition. They need someone to compete with, someone to outperform, someone to resist. For the top dog, this is a cornerstone of control. They shape identity around rivalry because it's measurable, predictable, and socially understandable. Enemies justify power, reinforce narratives, and create tension that makes dominance look necessary. Without opposition, authority feels hollow and achievements lose meaning. You don't play that game. You don't construct your identity around who stands against you or who bows before you. You don't need to fight, to prove, or to dominate. Your existence isn't defined by struggle with others. You operate from a place of internal coherence and self-validation, and that is deeply disorienting to someone who thrives on relational tension. They are used to reading influence like a map. Every action, every alliance, every rivalry tells a story. You remove the story. You are a constant that cannot be framed as a threat or a subordinate, a player or a pawn. This absence of relational definition unsettles them because it exposes a hidden truth. Power is often a narrative more than a force. If identity does not depend on opposition, the entire script of hierarchy begins to look optional. Your presence silently communicates that the rules they cling to are not universal laws. They are constructs, useful only for those who need validation from others. They may try to provoke a reaction, attempt to create conflict, or manipulate circumstances to manufacture opposition. It doesn't work. Your equilibrium does not depend on confrontation. Your independence deprives them of leverage because you cannot be framed, boxed, or neutralized through the usual channels. The subtle fear that emerges is not of aggression, it is of irrelevance. They realize that someone can exist fully, operate effectively, and even surpass expectations without ever needing to play the game of enemies. That quiet, self-sufficient power, internal calm, unmeasured by rivalry, is an unsettling mirror. It reflects the fragility of a system built entirely on dependency, and it's a mirror they cannot break or ignore. Number 6, you break patterns without announcing rebellion. Most people assume rebellion is loud, visible, and dramatic. They picture protests, arguments, or grand gestures. That's exactly the type of defiance the top dog expects, because it can be contained, framed, or crushed. It fits their understanding of control. What terrifies them is someone who breaks the system quietly, subtly, and without fanfare. You don't need to declare war on authority to undermine its predictability. You simply refuse to follow scripts that no longer serve you, and the consequences ripple in ways they cannot predict. You don't make noise. You don't posture. You do not seek attention for stepping off the line. You operate according to internal logic, and that alone creates disruptions. Small deviations accumulate over time, missed cues, unanticipated decisions, subtle shifts in behavior. All of it seems minor until the system begins to falter. Most leaders are trained to respond to overt challenges, not the invisible ones. And that is what makes you so disorienting, because your rebellion isn't a statement, it is a consequence. You are not performing against them. You are performing for coherence, efficiency, or personal clarity. Yet by doing so, you expose the cracks in their authority. Rules they thought were universal are revealed as arbitrary. Systems they believed were stable begin to feel precarious. And the top dog, who thrives on predictability, begins to feel tension in ways they cannot articulate. This kind of quiet disruption is dangerous because it cannot be neutralized with threats or rewards. You do not respond to fear, flattery, or expectation in the way most people do. That immunity makes you unreadable, unpredictable, and almost impossible to manipulate. They may try to trace a pattern, to anticipate your next move, only to discover that your behavior follows a logic they do not yet understand. Breaking patterns without announcing it is not about chaos. It is about autonomy. It is about functioning in a way that is real, unforced, and internally justified. And when someone operates like that, the top dog realizes, often too late, that control was never about force. It was about everyone agreeing to move predictably. You never agreed, and that makes you quietly terrifying. Number 7, you treat identity as fluid, not sacred. Most people cling to identity like it's a lifeline. Their career, status, beliefs, and social roles become sacred, untouchable, and absolute. The top dog depends on this rigidity because it creates predictability. When someone knows who you are, what you want, and how you'll react, they can position, manipulate, and control. Fixed identities make people legible, manageable, and ultimately influenceable. You don't operate that way. You treat identity as a tool, something adaptable, flexible, and responsive to context. You don't shrink or rebel when roles shift. You step in and out of labels as needed, without drama, without apology, and without losing coherence. This fluidity is deeply disorienting to anyone who built power by assuming others are predictable. You cannot be cornered into a role. You cannot be forced to react according to expectations. That flexibility creates a quiet kind of fear. The top dog expects to read you, to define you, to categorize you, but your internal logic is not tethered to any fixed framework. You are as consistent as your principles, but inconsistent in performance when the script demands it. That inconsistency is not a flaw, it's a signal. It says that the rules they depend on to predict behavior are optional, not universal. You show, without announcing it, that identity is not a cage, but a lens. You can adapt without losing yourself because your sense of self is internally anchored, not externally enforced. For someone whose influence relies on legibility, this is alarming. They can't manipulate you with labels, shame, or prestige. You simply shift, operate, and continue, leaving them grasping for control they cannot exert. Your fluid identity makes you untouchable in subtle ways. You cannot be framed, boxed, or cornered because the box itself is just another object in the room. And in the presence of someone who doesn't need to defend or prove a fixed self, the top dog feels an unease they cannot rationalize. You exist beyond their maps, their categories, and their assumptions, and that is why your presence is quietly, yet profoundly, destabilizing. Number 8, you don't seek validation from witnesses. Most people measure themselves by what others see, hear, and think. Applause, attention, recognition, these are the fuel that keeps ordinary influence alive. The top dog thrives on this because it makes control measurable. When people react predictably, respond with fear, admiration, or flattery, authority feels solid. Validation is the glue that keeps hierarchies intact, and everyone participates, willingly or not, in that social contract. You don't. You don't act for applause, approval, or observation. Your decisions, your behavior, your presence exist independently of spectators. You are not performing for anyone, and that is profoundly disorienting for someone accustomed to being the center of attention. They expect reactions to define the situation, smiles, nods, hesitations, gasps. But when you remain neutral, fully present yet untouched by the audience, the script collapses. This quiet indifference creates subtle fear. It's not dramatic, and it's not overtly threatening, but it destabilizes the top dog's sense of control. When no one's witness matters to you, the usual levers of influence fail. Praise cannot manipulate you, intimidation cannot bend you, and proximity cannot impress you. That absence of need makes you unreadable. Their strategies, carefully crafted over years, suddenly seem flimsy because they rely on emotional reactions you simply don't provide. You operate on internal alignment, not external affirmation. Your calm, self-sufficient presence exposes a truth the top dog cannot easily face. Influence is fragile. It only works on those who care about the observer. By removing that dependency, you reveal the fragility beneath the performance of power. The more you detach from needing validation, the more untouchable you become. You cannot be manipulated through applause, shaming, or comparison. You exist on a plane where authority is optional, not mandatory, and presence is measured by impact, not recognition. For someone whose dominance relies on everyone's participation in a collective script, your independence is quietly terrifying. You demonstrate that influence is never absolute. It only exists as long as others willingly feed it. Number 9. You can walk away without symbolic loss. Most people are trapped by attachment. They cling to relationships, positions, or opportunities as if leaving would diminish them. The top dog depends on this. Their control is reinforced by the belief that people need them, that absence equals loss, that separation carries cost. When others cannot afford to leave without consequence, power feels secure. You don't play that game. You can step away from any situation, any hierarchy, any engagement, without apology or dramatics. You don't burn bridges because you don't need to prove a point. You simply move according to your own alignment. That capability is subtle, but its impact is enormous. To the top dog, someone who can leave without damage is not just independent. They are untouchable in a way that cannot be bargained with or threatened. This makes them uncomfortable because they thrive on leverage. They expect that scarcity, access, or influence creates dependency. You remove that dependency instantly. Your presence is optional, your participation voluntary, and your absence inconsequential to your own trajectory. That quiet freedom undermines the whole notion of control. When someone realizes that leaving does not weaken you, they understand, often too late, that their ability to dictate or manipulate is limited. Walking away without symbolic loss is also a statement in itself. It signals confidence, clarity, and self-possession. It communicates that your identity and progress are not bound to any single system, person, or arrangement. You are not tethered to approval, attention, or status. This detachment forces the top dog to reassess their assumptions. They realize that power is not absolute. It is only a measure of what people allow it to be. The subtle fear this creates is not immediate or aggressive. It is the awareness that someone cannot be corralled, boxed, or pressured. You demonstrate that freedom is possible even within the structures they've built, and that their authority relies entirely on others' compliance. Your ability to walk away quietly, calmly, and without loss exposes the vulnerability of all those who think they hold control, making your independence both disruptive and deeply unsettling. Number 10. You don't mirror emotional energy. Most people operate on emotional reflex. Anger begets anger. Charm invites charm. Intimidation triggers submission. The top dog depends on this pattern. Their influence is amplified because reactions are predictable. They push, pull, charm, or threaten, and people respond in ways that reinforce their control. Emotional symmetry is the backbone of manipulation, and anyone who breaks that symmetry is a problem. You break it effortlessly. When they escalate, you remain calm. When they charm, you stay measured. When they try to intimidate, you do not contract. You respond according to reason, clarity, and principle, not according to their emotional rhythm. That difference is jarring. They are used to being able to anticipate behavior based on energy, and suddenly their calculations fail. They cannot read you, cannot predict your response, and cannot manipulate your state. This creates a quiet tension that grows under observation. People who rely on influence often mistake intensity for control, believing that reactions define reality. You expose the fragility of that assumption. By not matching their energy, you remove the feedback loop they depend on. Their tactics lose effectiveness, not because they are weak, but because they are irrelevant. You operate on a different metric, one they did not account for. The top dog begins to feel subtle panic. They can control many things, but energy misalignment is outside their training. They cannot push you into their narrative because you refuse to engage emotionally on their terms. This makes you unpredictable and difficult to contain. It forces them to confront a truth they dislike. Influence is only as strong as the responses it can trigger, and you refuse to be triggered. Not mirroring emotional energy is not coldness. It is presence. It is clarity in motion. It demonstrates that you cannot be read, swayed, or shaken by theatrical intensity. For someone accustomed to bending others through emotional leverage, your equilibrium is unnerving. You exist as a constant they cannot distort, a quiet force that exposes the mechanics of control while remaining entirely unaffected by them. Number 11, you measure time differently. Most people live on the clock of immediate outcomes. They measure success in quarters, deadlines, promotions, or social milestones. The top dog thrives in this structure because it allows influence to be predictable. Power is easier to maintain when everyone is chasing the same cycles, the same short-term markers. They understand how to manipulate urgency, reward, and consequence because everyone else thinks in the same limited framework. You don't. You operate on a different rhythm. You think in phases, patterns, and long-term consequences. Short-term wins may be interesting to you, but they do not dictate your decisions. You are not driven by immediate validation, recognition, or applause. Instead, you measure moves according to impact over time, leverage over months or years, and clarity over outcomes that actually matter. That perspective makes you almost untouchable because your decisions are not reactive, they are strategic. This difference is subtle, but profoundly destabilizing to the top dog. They rely on everyone playing by the same temporal logic. When someone ignores the urgency of the moment, does not panic under pressure, and does not crave immediate reward, it feels unnatural. They cannot push you with deadlines, cannot force compliance with impatience, and cannot manipulate with scarcity, because time does not govern your choices in the same way it governs theirs. By measuring time differently, you create a kind of invisibility. You move steadily, predictably unpredictable, responding only to what matters in the larger framework. Immediate chaos, crises, and pressure tactics roll off you because they are just minor ripples in a broader ocean you are navigating. That detachment makes you unreadable and unshakable. The top dog senses it instinctively. They notice that their leverage decays when someone is not bound by conventional timing. Their power relies on urgency, impatience, and alignment with their clock, and you refuse to play by it. You are operating on a scale they cannot see, in a rhythm they cannot anticipate, and with a patience they cannot measure. That quiet, unseen mastery of time is a form of control they cannot touch, and it unsettles them in ways nothing else can. Number 12, you don't over-identify with outcomes. Most people tie their sense of self to results. Wins become validation, losses become shame. The top dog relies on this because it makes behavior predictable. When someone's self-worth fluctuates with success or failure, it becomes easy to manipulate, steer, or pressure. Achievements impress, setbacks punish, and the emotional swings create a map that power can navigate. You don't operate that way. Your identity, your confidence, and your trajectory do not depend on external outcomes. Success is observed, failure is noted, but neither inflates nor diminishes your center. That detachment is disorienting to someone accustomed to reading people like a graph of highs and lows. They expect joy, pride, frustration, or despair to appear when results shift. When it doesn't, it challenges everything they thought they knew about influence and control. This creates subtle but potent unease. The top dog cannot use conventional levers to predict your behavior. Threats, praise, rewards, or pressure lose potency because they cannot provoke the usual emotional reactions. You are steady, coherent, and internally anchored. That consistency makes you unreadable because their whole strategy depends on behavioral elasticity, on the assumption that outcomes dictate responses. Your detachment also forces a deeper reckoning. By not over-identifying with results, you expose the truth that outcomes are not inherently meaningful. They only matter because people assign meaning to them. Most of the world participates in this illusion, and power relies on it. You operate outside of it, indifferent to applause or critique, and the top dog begins to see the fragility of the very systems they depend on to maintain dominance. This immunity to outcome-driven identity gives you freedom they cannot touch. You can act strategically, take risks, or withdraw without fear, not because you are fearless, but because your sense of self is intact, regardless. That quiet, invisible independence unsettles them more than overt defiance ever could. You demonstrate that true power is not in results. It is in maintaining internal coherence while the world oscillates around you. And for someone built on leveraging emotional reactions, that is profoundly unsettling. Number 13, you expose power by not chasing it. Most people are obsessed with power. They chase it openly, strategize endlessly, and measure their value by how much influence they can accumulate. The top dog depends on this hunger because it creates predictability. They can anticipate moves, manipulate ambition, and maintain control over a system built on desire. Power is only dangerous when it's unknown, unseen, or disinterested, and they know how to track the hunters. You don't hunt. You don't scramble for recognition, maneuver for position, or visibly vie for influence. You act, perform, and exist according to your own principles and timing. That very neutrality exposes a truth the top dog rarely admits. Power is only as strong as the people willing to seek or protect it. When someone refuses the game, the illusion cracks. You don't overthrow them. You show them the stage is optional, the throne is not mandatory, and the rules only bind those who choose to follow them. This is profoundly unsettling. They can handle challenges because challenges play a game they understand. They can manipulate, bribe, or threaten competitors. But someone who moves without desire for approval or elevation is outside the map. They cannot be read, predicted, or contained by the usual metrics. Their levers of influence, finely tuned over years, suddenly have no purchase. Your disinterest in chasing power is itself a form of control. It communicates strength without aggression. It demonstrates that true authority does not require domination, surveillance, or rivalry. You maintain presence, capability, and coherence without needing to mark territory or gather followers. That quiet, effortless autonomy forces the top dog to confront a truth they cannot easily admit. Influence is fragile, and it relies on consent, ambition, and participation. By not chasing power, you reveal that its foundations are conditional, not absolute. You operate on a plane where authority exists only when it is accepted, and you refuse to accept it as a requirement. That revelation is subtle, yet deeply disorienting. You expose the machinery of control without touching it, and the top dog, who built a career on manipulating desire and ambition, feels the destabilizing weight of a system that suddenly seems optional. Number 14. You exist without needing permission to be coherent. Most people feel the need for external approval to validate their thoughts, choices, and presence. They seek confirmation, alignment, or acknowledgement to feel real. The top dog depends on this because influence thrives on dependency. If someone requires permission, they can be guided, controlled, or contained. Authority works because it creates consent, whether through fear, respect, or admiration. You don't. Your coherence, your clarity of thought, purpose, and presence exists independently. You don't need anyone's approval to act, decide, or define your direction. You operate fully within your own logic, and that is profoundly unsettling to someone who relies on legibility to maintain control. They expect a pattern. If they push, you yield. If they praise, you respond. If they manipulate, you falter. You defy all of it, and in doing so, you become unreadable. This independence is quietly disruptive. They cannot leverage you because your alignment is internal, not dictated by circumstances or social scripts. You cannot be coerced through expectation, seduced with reward, or shaken by pressure. Their influence, honed over years, depends on predictability, but your self-sufficiency removes every predictable variable. They are left with uncertainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for someone accustomed to controlling outcomes. Your presence demonstrates a fundamental truth. Coherence does not require permission. Authority, systems, and hierarchies depend on collective agreement to function. When someone can exist fully without seeking validation, they expose the fragility of all structures built on dependence. You operate as a constant, internally justified force in a world where everyone else's logic is conditional. For the top dog, this is quietly terrifying. Your independence proves that influence is never absolute, that control is only effective on those who allow it, and that the perception of power is optional. You do not announce it, and you do not flaunt it. You simply are. And that simple fact, that someone can exist fully coherent without asking, needing, or waiting, undermines authority in a way no challenge, threat, or opposition ever could. Conclusion. What separates the truly formidable from the ordinary is not visible strength, loud ambition, or overt dominance. It is the quiet mastery of self, the invisible sovereignty that cannot be bought, coerced, or predicted. The chosen one, the one who operates outside the familiar rules, moves through life with a clarity and independence that makes even the most powerful uneasy. You don't bend to incentives, hierarchy, or expectation. You don't chase power, seek approval, or define yourself by rivalry. You act with internal alignment, observe outcomes rather than compete, and exist coherently without asking permission. Each subtle deviation, every unshakable choice, and every refusal to conform exposes the fragility of systems built on dependency and predictability. Those who try to measure you, manipulate you, or control you quickly realize that conventional tools are useless. You are untouchable, not because you flaunt power, but because your power is invisible, self-contained, and independent. The top dog may respect you, fear you, or try to categorize you, but the truth is simple. They cannot. You operate on a plane they were never trained to understand. And that is the essence of being otherworldly, mystical, and entirely autonomous. The quiet certainty that no external force can dictate your direction or diminish your presence. If you felt the impact of these truths and want to uncover more insights about independence, influence, and the hidden dynamics of power, make sure to stay connected. Subscribe to the channel to dive deeper into the world of the chosen ones. Like this video if it opened your eyes. Comment your thoughts and experiences below, and share this with anyone ready to awaken to a higher understanding of themselves and the world around them. This is where knowledge becomes power, and power becomes freedom. Stay blessed always.